At some point in our lives, each of us has had to fill out either an application or a registration form. For most people, the information's pretty standard. You have to fill out your name, your age, maybe your date of birth, your address. For me, filling out my college applications brought me to a crossroads. As I said, most of the information was pretty normal. But then I got to those little check boxes where you needed to indicate your race. Now, I paused here because I wasn't quite sure what that meant for me. I say this because I am adopted. And as a junior in high school, I had so many questions. I knew two things for sure. One, that I was born Latinx by birth, more specifically that I was Mexican American. And two, that I was raised by a white family. So both my parents were white, my brothers were white. Did that make me white? Was I one more than the other? How should I choose? So this made me think, what is my identity and where do I belong? So I talked to my parents about it to see which one I should choose. And they told me that I should choose the one that marks Latinx since that was my race. I wasn't sure if I agreed with them or not, but I decided I wasn't going to argue it, so I did it. College admissions started coming back, and I was elated to find out that I was admitted to the University of Michigan. It was my dream come true. Naturally, being a high school student, I went back, I shared this with my friends and my other classmates. We loved to interchange stories of joy, stories of struggle. But there was one conversation I remember having with one of my classmates. And he was experiencing his own frustration with his admission status to the University of Michigan. And he looked at me and he said, "You only got in because you're Mexican. And that's not fair because you're not even Mexican." Did that hurt? Absolutely. But it hurt most because I thought to myself, who are you to decide what I am and what I am not? Why are other people defining my identity for me? And here I have someone, a classmate, making these generalizations for me. What was I supposed to do? How do I interact in that? How do I really define my identity? It really kickstarted this journey. And so I take these little check boxes and I reflected on it and I thought, how do people actually define their identity? Through my discoveries, I found that most people are able to link their identity and their cultural heritage directly to their parents. Now, let me be clear, my parents were wonderful. They gave me so many great traditions and cultural things that I can exhibit and love and earn. But how will I ever access and understand the Mexican part of my identity? How will I share that with my own children? This thought brought me to the cornerstone of an idea: how does someone access their identity? There are so many people out there who are struggling and are in need of someone to provide the guidance. They need someone that they can talk to so they can understand all the different traditions, recipes, and all the other celebrations that come with their cultural heritage. But what do these people do if that lifeline is not available? What if that person is not there so that they can talk to and understand more? So this set me off to go and find some answers. About 11 years ago, I had the opportunity to go to the People of Color Conference from my school. The People of Color Conference is a conference primarily for individuals who identify as a person of color. They can go, they can hear keynote speakers, they can attend workshops, they can also participate in affinity groups. Now, the affinity groups are meetings for people who identify with a specific race or ethnicity. When I got to the conference, I wasn't quite sure where I should go. Should I go to the white European affinity group? Should I go to the Latinx affinity group? I wasn't sure. I was confused. But luckily, I had some colleagues who were incredibly supportive of me, and they encouraged me to go to the Latinx Affinity Group because they said, go and learn more about who you are. And so I went. When I arrived, though, I immediately felt out of place. I sat down and I heard stories from individuals, and they shared how their culture was so important to their identity. I offered up my own stories, and I tried to describe what it meant for me to have a Latin identity. But as I spoke, I realized that I didn't share the same involvement with the culture and the traditions. I realized that I didn't have that same commonality and that common point. I honestly just felt lost. And I thought to myself, how am I ever going to start this conversation about learning more of my identity if I can't even have that space here? How will I learn more and discover more about myself if even in this space I wouldn't be able to find it? So reflecting on this, it made me think about how difficult it really is to talk about and start the conversation of identity. Even now, when I have these conversations and I talk to people and I inform them that I'm adopted, I tend to get sympathetic responses. I tend to get the, oh, I didn't know, or I'm sorry to hear that. And that always left me so confused because are you agreeing in some way that there's a part of my identity I'll never understand? Or are you implying that somehow my life has been less fortunate because I'm adopted? But the truth is, my parents, they're my parents. My brothers, they are my brothers. They are my family. And there's no other way for me to think about that. When I hear these conversations, I often love to relive them in my mind. I love to think about how I wish people would have handled that conversation a little differently. And when it comes down to it, I really wish people would just ask questions and listen. I wish that they would engage and learn more about what it is for my identity. Because when they engage and become a little bit more vulnerable with themselves, I feel like they will learn more about me and learn more about themselves. So even a simple question of saying, hey, I didn't know you were adopted. Tell me more about what that means for you. So how does this translate to others? How does this apply to the bigger picture? I believe I'm not alone. I believe that there are people out there who are struggling to understand who they are, what their identity is, and how to know more about it. But they simply just do not know how to begin the conversation. We, as a community, need to be willing to take that first step and to reach out and ask questions and engage others to bring them in and to be comfortable with who we are so that way they know that it's safe to ask those questions. Here's why I feel this is true. Last year, I had the opportunity to go back to the People of Color Conference. I was hesitant to go for so many years, honestly because I didn't think there was anything there for me. I didn't think I would learn anything new. I didn't feel like I would get the answers I was looking for. But you know what? I decided I had to go. I needed to give it another shot. So I went, and I went to my first workshop. And as fate would have it, I sat down next to a woman from Minnesota, and we began to talk. As we spoke, she informed me that she too is adopted, and that she was going to go to the Transracial Adopted Affinity Group. Now, this group was new to the conference and didn't even exist 11 years ago. And she said to me, "You should come. I think you might learn something about yourself." And I went. And I have to tell you, I was absolutely blown away. When I got there, I heard stories of individuals that I felt, yes, I understand what you mean. They talked about what it was growing up feeling like they didn't quite know where they belonged. They got to talk about their frustrations and their angers, but at the same time, their conclusions about what it felt like to grow up in a family of a different race. I got to hear how it felt when they saw the family picture. And they always knew, people were looking at it saying, something's not quite right. But I also got to hear how they got to speak to other people and say, it's okay, they're my family. So when I met these people, I saw a place where I can ask questions and people could ask questions of me. It was a place without any judgment. I didn't need to know my identity in that moment. I didn't need to have the answers to my questions. It was simply a moment where I didn't feel lost. These people were willing to share their own vulnerability with me so that way I could choose to be vulnerable with them and learn more about who I was. So through the years, I've had a difficult time trying to identify what my race is. As time's gone on, I've become more comfortable with it, and I'm willing to share that information with others. I am transracially adopted, and it's a little complicated. But honestly, I want people to engage in the conversations. I want them to feel comfortable and to feel vulnerable, so that way you can invite other people to be vulnerable with you. And this has pushed me to be more comfortable with sharing information about myself with as many people that I can find, because I want to provide that same platform. And it brought me to a situation last year. I had a student, or I should say I had a class with some students, and I let them know that I was adopted. And after class, many of them actually stayed behind because they wanted to talk to me, and they wanted to talk about what it meant and what their identity was and what my identity was. And we got to share questions with each other. After everyone had left, there was one student who stayed behind who actually wasn't a part of the conversation. They just sat in the back and listened. And that student came to me and they said, I'm adopted too. And I had no idea that you shared the similar experiences as me. I had no idea that what I was feeling was something that someone else was feeling. And all I want is to sit down from time to time and to talk to someone and to ask questions and to learn more about myself. So what I know I'm doing is normal. I never would have known this about this individual had I not been willing to take that risk to put myself out there and to share more about myself so that others could come in. So here's my wish for everyone. My wish is that each of us can see ourselves and as others as more than just a checkbox. Let's move past that one thing we think we know about other people and join in the conversation so that each of us can learn more about what your identity means to you. Thank you.